Hi, I'm Patrick Regan. Welcome to the Windows Tools, Part 16, Windows Group Policies and Local Policy. During this video, we'll introduce group policy and local policies, which is used to configure computer settings. As always, stick around for the practice questions at the end to test your knowledge and help you prepare for the A+ exam. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to click the like button, and if you have not already, subscribe to the Pat Has Your Back channel for more tech training content and technical know-how. Group policy is a mechanism for controlling and deploying operating system settings to computers and users. Group policies are used to centrally manage, secure, and configure Windows environments, including servers and workstations. They're used to automate routine IT tasks such as enforcing security settings, mapping network drives, deploying software, and restricting user access to control panel options, ensuring a consistent and secure environment. By implementing GPOs, organizations can reduce the need to manually configure each computer, leading to improved security and reduced IT support tickets. Example settings include password policy, account lockout policy, audit policies, colors and background images, startup and login scripts, start menu and taskbar, browser settings, software deployment, printer deployment and settings, and power management. You can configure one or more group policy objects and then use a process called linking to associate them with specific Active Directory domain system objects such as domain organization unit or site. After you link a GPO to a container object, all of the objects in the container receive the settings you configure in the GPO. You can link multiple GPOs to a single ADDS container, or you can link one GPO to multiple containers throughout the ADDS hierarchy. Group policies that are linked to domains, organization units, and sites are managed through Group Policy Management, which is an Active Directory tool. By default, every domain will have two policies: the default domain policy and the default domain controller policy. Group policies that are assigned to Active Directory objects will be refreshed on a computer every 90 minutes with a randomized offset of up to 30 minutes. So therefore, it may take up to 2 hours for the new or modified GPO settings to be applied to a computer. To force the GPO to update the GPO settings, you can execute the following command: gpupdate/force. All Windows operating systems have support for local GPOs, known as LGPOs, except domain controllers. This enables you to specify a different local GPO for you, or to create specific GPO settings for one or more local users configured on a workstation. This capability is particularly valuable for computers in public locations such as libraries and kiosks, which are not part of an Active Directory infrastructure. GPO applies to all users who log on to the computer. Local GPO settings are stored on the local computer in the System Root System32 Group Policy folder. Local GPOs contain fewer options than domain GPOs. They do not support folder redirection or group policy software installation. Fewer security settings are available. When a local and non-local GPO have conflicting settings, the local GPO settings are overwritten by those of the non-local GPO. You can open local policies using the mmc.exe console, specifying group policy object, and select local computer. You can also open the local policy by using the gpedit command. As you can see, there are thousands of settings. The security settings allow you to configure the following policies and settings: account policies, local policies, Windows Defender Firewall with advanced security, public key policies, software restriction policies, application control policies, and advanced audit policy configuration. The security settings under Administrative or Windows Tools maps to the security settings under Computer Configuration. To access group policies assigned at the domain or organizational units, log into a domain controller, and then using Server Manager and Open Policy Management or from any computer that has Remote Server Administrative Tools or RSAT, open Group Policy Management. Windows includes thousands of administrative template policies which contain registry-based policy settings that are used to configure the user and computer environment. For example, to configure the user's desktop image or default screensaver, you use an administrative template policy. Another example is configure the Start menu and taskbar. Additional ADMX files can be added to the Windows Policy Definitions folder so that you can configure additional settings. Some examples include Microsoft Office, Adobe products, and Google Chrome, which you will need to download and copy to the appropriate folders. When configuring administrative templates, there are 3 states: not configured, which is the registry key is not modified or overridden; enabled, where the registry key is modified by this setting; and disabled, where the disabled settings undo a change made by a prior enabled setting. If you want to undo the group policy, removing the group policy does not necessarily remove the settings from a computer that has the settings configured with the GPO. In these cases, you need to change the policy to disabled or create a second policy and apply it to the computer and/or user. After the policy is applied, the policy can be removed. The policy can also be manually removed using the registry editor. The location of these settings are shown on the screen. Remember, if the group policy still has an active setting, it will reestablish within 2 hours when the GPO settings refresh on the computer. You can use group policy to disable access to USB drives. The setting can be found in Computer Configuration, Administrative Template, System, Removable Storage Access. Password policy determines settings for passwords such as enforcement and lifetimes. Minimum password length defines the minimum number of characters that a user's password must contain. The default value is 7. Complexity requirements defines a default password filter that is enabled by default. Microsoft Complex Passwords defines the following characteristics: does not contain your name or your username, contains at least 6 characters, and contains characters from 3 of the following 4 groups: uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numerals, and special non-alphanumeric characters such as those shown on the screen. Enforced password history defines the number of unique new passwords that must be associated with a user account before an old password can be reused. The default setting is 24 previous passwords. Maximum password age defines the number of days that a password can be used before the user must change it. The default setting is 42 days. Minimum password age defines the number of days that a password must be used before the user can change it. The default value is 1 day, which is appropriate if you also enforce password history. If a hacker has enough time, he or she can crack any password. To help prevent the cracking of a password, you can limit how many times a hacker can guess a password before the account is locked. Account lockout refers to the number of incorrect login attempts permitted before a system locks in an account. Group policies include the following account lockout settings: account lockout duration, which determines the length of time a lockout will remain in place before another login attempt can be made. If set to 0, administrator will need to manually unlock the account. Account lockout threshold determines the number of failed logins permitted before the account logout occurs. Reset account logout counter after determines the period of time in minutes that must elapse before the account logout counter is reset to 0 bad login attempts. If you want to use password and account lockout policies for non-domain computers running Windows, you would use the local policy. For domain computers, you want to use the default domain policy or password setting objects. Instead of using a password and account logout policies from group policies, most corporations will use password setting objects or PSOs to provide fine-grained password policies allows you to apply different passwords and account lockout rules to a specific set of users or global security groups within a single domain. Instead of Group Policy Management or gpedit, you have to open Active Directory Administrative Center, System Password Settings container. As you can see, the PSO has similar settings found in the GPO. A permission defines the type of access is granted to an object or object attribute. An object can be identified with a security identifier. The most common objects assigned permissions are NTFS files and folders, printers, and Active Directory objects. To keep track of all of this, information such as which user can access an object and what the user can do is recorded in the Access Control List, or ACL, which lists all users and groups that have access to the object. A user right authorizes the user to perform certain actions on a computer, such as logging onto a system interactively or backing up files and directories on a system. User rights are assigned through local policies or Active Directory group policies. Some examples of user right managements include the following. Allow logon locally, where this policy settings determines which user can start an interactive session on the computer. The error message the users will see without this permission is, the local policy of the system does not permit you to log on interactively. The Allow Logon Through Remote Desktop Services policy settings determines which user can log on to the computer through remote desktop connections. It is best practice to add users to or remove users from the remote desktop users group to control who can open a remote desktop connection to the computer. The remote desktop user group is assigned this permission. Add workstations to domain is a policy setting that determines which users can add a computer to a specific domain. Backup files and directories settings determines which users can circumvent file and directory permissions to back up the computer. Change the system time determines which user can adjust the time on the computer's internal clock. Load and unload device drivers determines which user can dynamically load and unload device drivers. Shut down the system determines which user can shut down the local computer. And take ownership of files or other objects determines which users can take ownership of any securable objects in the computer, including Active Directory objects, NTFS files and folders, printers, registry keys, services, processes, and threads. Windows Update Group Policy settings are primarily managed through the group policy to control how devices and organizations receive and install updates. It can be found under Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Windows Updates. The following are the most commonly configured settings. Configure Automatic Updates is the foundational setting to enable or disable updates. Options include 2. Notify for download and auto-install, which notifies users before downloading. 3. Auto-download and notify for install, which downloads in the background, then notifies for installation. 4. Which auto-downloads and schedules install. This is the most common setting for IT admins to automate the process. And 7. Which notifies for install and notify for restart, which is specific to Windows Server 2016 and later. Specify Internet Microsoft Update Service Location is used when using Windows Server Update Services, or WSUS, to point clients to a local update server instead of the public internet. No auto restart with logged on users prevents forced restarts if someone signed into the machine. Active hours is configured via turn off auto restart for updates during active hours to ensure reboots don't happen during the user's workday. Specified deadline for automatic updates and restarts forces compliance by setting a specific number of days before an update must be installed. And Windows Update for Business allows deferring features updates up to 365 days and quality updates up to 30 days directly from Microsoft. The default domain policy is linked to the entire domain. It affects every user and every computer joined to that domain. By default, it's the primary place where account-wide restrictions are set, including password and account rules. It includes the password policy, which includes the minimum password length, complexity requirements, password history, and maximum and minimum password age. It also includes the account lockout policy, where it's how many failed login attempts are allowed before a user is locked out, and how long the account stays locked. Kerberos policy settings are related to the ticket lifetimes and clock synchronizations, which is important for authentication security. And Encrypted File System, or EFS recovery, is the default data recovery agent for encrypted files. It is recommended to not modify default domain policy except for the password and account policies. The default domain controller's policy is linked specifically to the domain controller's organizational unit. It only affects the servers that act as domain controllers, not regular workstations or member servers. It contains user rights assignments, which defines who can do what on the domain controllers, allow logon locally, which is usually restricted to administrators on the domain controllers, logon as a service, which is essential for specific backup or monitoring accounts, access this computer from the network, which controls who can connect to the DC over the wire, audit policies tells the domain controller what events to record in the security logs. It includes auditing account management of who changed the password, auditing directory service access, and auditing log-on, log-off events, especially on the domain controller. Security options include the digital signing of communications, which ensures the conversation between the domain controller and other machines haven't been tampered with, and refusing older authentication protocols, such as disabling NTLM version 1 for better security. Group Policy Preferences, or GPP, are only available to Active Directory policies. You will not find them in local policies. The key difference between preferences and policy settings is enforcement. Although the group policy setting interface is usually disabled or grayed out, preferences settings can still be changed. By default, group policy refreshes preferences uses the same interval as group policy settings. However, you can choose to prevent group policy from refreshing individual preferences by choosing to apply them only once. This allows you to assign a default value, but allows the user to change to his or her liking. The more popular preference extensions include, for Windows settings, environment variables that define environment variables for users and computers, files and folders that distribute files and folders from a specific source to many machines on the network or clean up existing files and folders on those machines, the registry that manages registry settings on a per user or per computer basis, shortcuts, which create and deploy shortcuts to desktop, documents, or other locations, and drive maps that configure map drives to shares on the network. Control panel settings include scheduled tasks that create, modify, or delete scheduled tasks, local users and groups that create, modify, or delete local user accounts and security groups, and printers that create, modify, or delete local or network printer objects or share local printers to the network. By default, for a computer or user to receive GPO settings from a GPO, the computer or user must have allow read permission and allow apply group policy permission to the GPO. By default, authenticated users has to allow read and allow apply group policy to a GPO, which includes domain computers. If you want to limit which computer users get to GPO, you can remove the authenticated users group and specify a different group. If you want a GPO not to apply to a specific user group, specify the deny apply group policy for that user or group. In addition, don't forget that the GPO has to be applied to the domain, organization unit, or site where the computer or user account is located. The command to see the GPO being applied, gpresult/lar. The command to see which GPUs are being applied and the settings being applied, you can execute the following command, gpresult/lar/v. For the system, the default domain controller policy, default domain policy, and the disable camera is being applied. You can also see that the camera is disabled. 0 means disabled, while 1 means enabled. You can also use the group policy management to review the group policy results, where you first specify the computer, and then a user has logged into that computer. Here you can see the applied GPOs. In here, you can see that the allow use of camera is disabled. Group policy objects are being replaced by Microsoft Intune for modern cloud-native management, but they're not yet fully replaced in all environments. Intune uses configuration profiles and configuration service providers, or CSPs, to manage device settings remotely, replacing on-premise GPO reliance for Windows, Android, and Apple devices. Many organizations adopt a hybrid approach using Intune for remote workforce device management while maintaining GPOs for legacy desktop settings. If both are used, GPOs often take precedence to avoid this. It is recommended to transition to managing settings primarily via Intune. Question: which of the following is used to change the security settings for a computer in a domain environment? Answer: group policy. Question: you're an administrator of a Windows Active Directory domain. What is the best way to configure home directories and network printers for 100 users? Answer: group policy. Question: on Windows 11 machine, what can you use to configure the local group policy? Answer: gpedit. Question: you want to disable USB drive usage. What is the easiest way to disable USB drives without interrupting any user? Answer: use a group policy. Question: what command do you use to refresh the group policy settings after you made changes to a group policy? Answer: gpupdate/force. Question: which of the following is located on our account policies? Choose all that apply. Answers: Kerberos policy, password policy, and account lockout policy. Question: what command would you use to view the current GPO settings being applied to a computer? Answer: gp result/v/r. For more information, refer to these sites. In summary, group policy is a mechanism for controlling and deploying operating system settings to computers and users. You can configure one or more group policy objects, or GPOs, and then use the process called linking to associate them with specific Active Directory domain system objects such as domain, organization unit, or site. Group policies that are linked to domains, organization units, and sites are managed through Group Policy Management, which is an Active Directory tool. Group policies that are assigned to Active Directory objects will be refreshed on a computer every 90 minutes with a randomized offset of up to 30 minutes. To force the GPO to update the GPO settings, you can execute the following command: gpupdate/force. All Windows operating systems have support for local GPOs known as LGPOs. You can open the local group policy editor by opening the group policy plugin in the MMC, or you can execute the gpedit command. Windows includes thousands of administrative template policies, which contains registry-based policy settings that are used to configure the user and computer environment. The security settings allow you to configure account policies and local policies. A user right authorizes a user to perform certain actions on a computer, such as logging onto a system interactively or backing up files and directories on a system. This completes the Windows Tools series. The next series will be configuring Windows. If you like this video, click the like button. If you have not already, subscribe to the Pat Has Your Back channel. Thank you.